To find yourself, think for yourself. Socrates. We often live with thoughts that are not our own. We borrow beliefs from family, repeat opinions from society, and accept conclusions without ever questioning them. In that state, what we call the self is merely a collection of loud echoes that lack originality. The act of thinking for oneself is not just an intellectual skill. It is a silent rebellion against conformity. Thinking for yourself is like stepping out of a closed room for the first time and realizing the sky is not the color you were told. It requires doubt, not to destroy, but to purify. When we question the seemingly obvious, we begin to peel away the layers of the false ego. This process is not pleasant. It is like shedding a painful old layer of skin, yet it is necessary for growth. However, within that uncertainty, something authentic emerges, an inner voice that is no longer drowned out. But without independent thought, humans easily fall into a passive form of existence, living by inertia, deciding according to the crowd, and losing the right to define themselves. They may feel safe, but it is the safety of a broken compass that never gets lost, because it has never truly chosen a direction. Therefore, finding oneself is not a journey outward, but a journey inward, and the starting point is always this: dare to think with your own mind instead of living through the thoughts of others. Few people have the imagination to visualize reality. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Humanity does not lack reality. It lacks the ability to see through what is already present, seeing, but not truly looking, experiencing, but not understanding. Imagination here is not a flighty escape from reality, but the capacity to restructure what exists, to view an event from multiple angles, connect fragmented details, and recognize the patterns hidden beneath a familiar surface. Without imagination, reality becomes flat and dull, like a painting with only outlines and no depth. Most people live in a simplified version of the world. They rely on cognitive habits and ready-made patterns to save mental energy. This helps them function faster, but it also causes them to lose the capacity for discovery. Imagination requires slowing down a pause to ask, in what other way can this be understood? It is like looking at a block of stone and seeing not just its current shape, but the potential statues within. It is this ability that allows humans to understand reality more deeply, rather than running away from it. When imagination is lacking, people easily get trapped on the surface of things. They accept the obvious as the whole truth, and thus, the world becomes monotonous and predictable, yet poor in meaning. Therefore, to see reality clearly, we don't need less imagination, but more. Because only when we dare to imagine, dare to expand our perspective, can we touch the depths that the naked eye alone can never recognize. Growth is the only evidence of life. Henry Newman. A body may still breathe, a person may still function, but without growth in perception, emotion, or will, it is merely the prolongation of inertia, not life in its true sense. Like stagnant water, the surface may appear calm, but the inside is slowly rotting. In contrast, a rushing river, though it crashes against rocks and constantly changes course, carries the clearest sign of life, movement, and transformation. Growth is not simply accumulating more. It is the continuous restructuring of oneself. It is the process of daring to abandon old versions of oneself, outdated beliefs, and stifling habits to step into states that are less certain but more authentic. It requires a form of courage to accept that the person of yesterday is not enough to face the life of today. And it is this acceptance that creates inner movement, the very thing that sustains life at its deepest level. When a person stops growing, they do not just stand still, they begin to degenerate. Stagnation is not a neutral state, but a form of slow decline. One may cling to a comfort zone, but the price is the atrophy of the capacity to feel, create, and find meaning. The only evidence of life lies not in how long we exist, but in how much we have changed. As long as we are growing, we are alive. When we stop, we only exist as a shadow of ourselves. The only disability in life is a bad attitude. Scott Hamilton. Life, in itself, carries no flaws. It is a neutral flow, like white light that has not yet been split by a prism. It is our attitude that acts as that prism, bending, tinting, and sometimes distorting the entire reality. When a person carries bitterness, they see the world as a battlefield. But when they nurture gratitude, that same world becomes a blooming garden. This shows that the fault lies not in the circumstances, but in how the mind interprets them. A negative attitude is like a virus. It not only weakens the will, but silently sabotages the ability to recognize opportunities. Those who carry it often imprison themselves in an invisible cage where every door is imagined to be locked tight. Conversely, a positive attitude is not naivety, but a form of mental strength, a proactive decision to see possibility even in chaos. It is like holding a torch in the dark. The darkness does not vanish, but you are no longer consumed by it. It is not adversity, failure, or uncertainty that defines us, but how we react to them. When we change our attitude, we don't just change our emotions, we restructure our entire life experience. And in that moment, life is no longer something to be fixed. It becomes something to be understood and enjoyed. The privilege of a lifetime is being who you are. Joseph Campbell. Most people don't truly live, they perform. They put on roles pre-written by society, repeat borrowed expectations, and gradually lose their original voice. Living against one's nature is like a tree forced to grow into the shape of a mold. It still grows, but it is distorted, stressed, and never reaches its natural potential. Being allowed to live as yourself is a privilege, not because it is easy to achieve, but because it requires a rare level of courage. It is the courage to face disapproval, to step away from the crowd, and to say, "This is me," without asking for permission. Psychologically, this is a state where inner self and behavior no longer conflict. Then, one no longer consumes energy maintaining a fake version. They become light, like a river flowing in the right direction, no longer bent by invisible walls. When we live contrary to ourselves, we enter a form of alienation. We may succeed, be recognized, even be admired, but inside, we are empty. That is the price of betraying oneself, a simmering dissatisfaction that no achievement can compensate for. It is not about how much we have, but about who we dare to be. When a person lives true to their essence, they don't just live, they exist fully. And that itself is the deepest form of freedom. To live is to suffer. To survive is to find meaning in the suffering. Friedrich Nietzsche. Suffering is not an accident. It is the foundational material of the living experience, like the friction necessary to create movement. Every loss, every failure, every crack in expectation is like a cut on the surface of the mind, forcing us to feel, to think, and to confront. No one escapes it, because without suffering, humans would have no reason to change, no motivation to understand themselves more deeply. But if one stops only at enduring, they will be crushed by its weight. To survive in the profound sense is not about avoiding suffering, but about restructuring it into meaning, turning trauma into insight, loss into growth, and chaos into an acceptable narrative. It is like a blacksmith using fire and hammer things that could destroy to create a sharp blade. Suffering, when understood correctly, is no longer an enemy, but a tool. When humans refuse to find meaning, suffering becomes meaningless, and it is that meaninglessness that is truly unbearable. A meaningful pain can be borne. A meaningless pain only breaks a person from within. Thus, the essence of existence lies not in whether we suffer, but in what we do with it. When we find meaning, we do not eliminate suffering, but we rise above it. And in that paradox, we touch the deepest form of human freedom. Live your life as though every act were to become a universal law. Immanuel Kant. Humanity must face an uncomfortable question. If how I behave today were multiplied infinitely, would the world become better or worse? Every small action is no longer an isolated incident. It becomes a test case for all of humanity. A lie, if universalized, would break all trust. A kind act, if replicated, would restructure the living environment. This does not allow us to hide in mediocrity. It forces us to live with an awareness of consequences. This way of life creates a constant state of inner observation. We no longer act just to satisfy momentary emotions, but must consider, do I accept everyone doing exactly as I do? That requires a rare maturity, the ability to delay immediate convenience to protect a long-term principle. It is like building a bridge. Each stone must be laid with the awareness that it will bear the weight of countless footsteps, not just our own. When people live without considering universality, they easily fall into self-justification. Just this once. No one will know. But those small exceptions, when repeated, become the hidden norm, silently eroding the moral structure. Living as if your actions were law is not about being perfect, but about being responsible. In that framework, every choice is no longer random. It becomes a declaration of the kind of world we are willing to help create. You can't use up creativity. The more you use, the more you have. Maya Angelou. Unlike money or physical energy, which deplete as they are used, creativity operates like a flame. The more it is fanned, the more it spreads. But remarkably, most people treat creativity as a finite resource. They fear running out of ideas, fear being wrong, fear repeating themselves, and that very fear locks the flow within them. It is not because they lack ability, but because they do not allow it to move. Creativity is not a storage bin. It is a process, like a muscle. If not used, it atrophies. If trained, it grows exponentially. Every time you experiment, imagine, or connect seemingly unrelated things, you are expanding your cognitive structure. The brain learns to be more flexible, more daring, and gradually, ideas are no longer things to be hunted, but things that naturally appear. At that point, creativity is no longer an effort, but a state of being. When unused, creativity does not vanish, it freezes. Humans fall into ruts of thinking, repeating old patterns, and mistakenly believe they lack talent. But the truth is, they have stopped nurturing it. Spend your creativity generously. Write, draw, think, try, fail. Not to reach perfection, but to maintain the flow. And in that process, you will realize one thing. Creativity is not something you possess, but something you become when you dare to use it. Every man's life is a fairy tale, written by God's fingers. Hans Christian Andersen. When we see life as a story, we no longer see events as random and fragmented. They become chapters, nodes, and climaxes connected by a deep logic we may not yet fully understand. The notion of God does not necessarily have to be a specific entity. It can be understood as the greater order of existence, an invisible author weaving the plot where each human plays a character. This perspective brings a change, turning suffering into a plot point, loss into a turning point, and silences into necessary parts of the rhythm. A story without conflict is meaningless. Similarly, a life without challenges lacks depth. When we believe we are being told, we no longer resist every adversity, but start to ask, what is my role in this scene? What is being revealed through this experience? A story, though it has an author, still needs characters to live their roles fully. If we live superficially, the story becomes bland. If we live consciously, every action becomes a word of weight. Meaning lies not in controlling the entire plot, but in how we are present in every moment. By viewing life as a story being told, we find not only comfort, but an invitation. Live so that the story is worth listening to until the very end. When you reach the end of your rope, tie a knot and hang on. Abraham Lincoln. The end of the road is not just an external depletion of options, but a moment of inner disorientation, when every familiar strategy fails and every exit seems closed. In that state, the instinct to let go emerges as a rational whisper. Tying a knot is the act of re-establishing control in a space where we thought all power was lost. It could be a decision to continue for one more day, to maintain a simple habit, or just to refuse to surrender. Right now, these actions do not solve the problem immediately, but they prevent total collapse. Like a rock climber in a storm, they don't need to keep climbing immediately. They just need to tie the rope tighter so they don't fall. It is this delay of failure that creates time, and time, in many cases, is the very condition for things to change. When people give up at their limit, they often confuse the end of possibility with the end of a moment. In reality, many turning points only appear after we have been at the very edge of endurance. Hanging on is not blind stubbornness, but a form of conscious persistence, understanding that we don't need to win yet, we just need to not lose. And sometimes, that very not, that seemingly insignificant act, is what keeps the entire life from slipping away.